Well, hello, I'm Pastor Z,
I'm Angel. Hello.
and welcome back for episode 2 of the things I did not learn at home. And what do we call that, Angel?
Life lessons. Life lessons.
Yay! Yes, there are definitely life lessons. Well, today on the podcast, Angel and I were speaking briefly, and we still want to continue from that platform. In other words, we want to take life lessons into the relationships between parents and their children, whether it's an adult child or whether it's still a child that's living in the home. We wanted to go a little further in our exploration of just talking about some of the things that we don't normally touch on, which is healing and practicing how to even be reconciled back with our adult children that might be having anger issues. Something got interrupted along the road. Maybe there's a place where they've just decided to cut us off, but we didn't cut them off. And we want to be able to talk about that and be very candid and transparent in that type of environment where those relationships have actually found their root. So, what do you think about that, Angel?
I think it's a very important topic. I think it's critical because obviously raising children that live with you or minor children is very different than raising adult children. Um,
Yes.
the dynamic is different. You're in a different life space, and the level of care, while it is different, in some ways it remains the same. And I think there's a challenge for parents with adult children because there's always that. I feel like there's always that want to revert back to your 9-year old or your 10-year old or the teenager, right? Because parents want what's best for their children. But I also think sometimes they get sidetracked by the life that they have envisioned for their children versus what their children should be doing and living out, or what God has for their children.
I think that's hitting the nail on the head. I think oftentimes, because as parents who have yet to have that adult child, we still don't see the individuality, the place where they still need a little more room to grow. And sometimes we're not tuned in to the peer pressure or the other social issues that might actually be going on with them. It could even be maybe an identity problem. We really don't know. And it's not as if every parent is trying to be neglectful. Sometimes parents get caught up in their own environment and life, work related issues or other things where maybe they're not meeting their bills. And so, because of that, we're just hoping that maybe someone can understand. But the unfortunate part is there's not a mediator between that parent and that child or that adult child to really help kind of supervise how we talk with one another sometimes. And those are skills that I believe can be very difficult at times to learn. What are your thoughts?
I what I think when I think about just my own dynamic with my parents and some people in my sphere of influence, I don't think, well, first of all, number one, you don't get a manual on how to be a parent,
Yeah.
right? So this new life comes into the world, and you kind of learn trial and error. So no matter how old or how young you are, you know, you when you have a child, you get ready. You're not ready, right? There again, it doesn't come with a manual on what to do and how to do at this age and that age. You can only take information from your own community, people, your parents, others, extended family. So first, I think we have to go back to, where are parents learning, parents of adult children, where are they learning the skills to parent? Where are they learning emotional intelligence or how to, own their own part of the dynamic, right? Because children, essentially, as well as parents, because at some point, parents are the children of some other parent, right? And
Right.
are the totality of your exposure and your experience. So if your parents can only raise you to the level that they have gone. So unless they go out and seek more information, education, they can't give it to you, right? So I think that's the part where, probably some parents are, you know, not as vulnerable or transparent to say, you know what, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not sure how to bridge this gap with, my adult daughter or son, etc. And so, again, number one, where are they getting those skills from? And number two, having the vulnerability, the humility, if you will, to say, I need some help or I need some guidance. Because I think there is an assumption of parents that because I am older than you and
You froze for a moment.
that I know more than you do. So,
Yeah. And I think that oftentimes, just like you're sharing, there seems to be a smothered voice almost between the child and the parent figure, the caregiver, where they're not listening. It could be a two-way street. And most of the time, it is that the parent is not listening per se to the child, regardless of the age, because again, they are saying that they know best and they're trying to do the best that they have the equipment to use to do things by. However, I don't understand the part I was going to put in there of allowing open communication. It doesn't have to be around the dinner table. It could be actually maybe some type of opportunity that you and your family set up for one day during the week as a check-in on each other. And you can share things that have been going on in your life that maybe the parent or perhaps the child is unaware of. For example, I'm not saying go as far maybe as sharing some of the harm or hurts, but then again, it may be very important to do that because our concerns are still about those life lessons and helping that child develop into an adult that doesn't have maladaptive problems that could have been possibly avoided if we were transparent in sharing some things. And that could be from how we feel about our careers, all the way down to maybe we didn't have the greatest upbringing as children. Maybe we were abandoned by parents and had to go live with grandparents, whatever the case might be. And you're hoping that that's also going to develop the empathy in a child versus apathy, where they're not caring about anyone else but themselves.
yeah, I mean, I definitely could see that. I think, here again, it's creating the space, right? Both
Yeah.
people have to be vulnerable enough. The parent and the adult child need to be vulnerable enough and open enough to say, we need to have a conversation. Too often, especially in, I'll speak about my own culture in Black Americans, these type of conversations are taboo, right?
Yes.
So it's the age old, what happens in our house stays in our house, right? Or you do it because I said so. And there's this sense of I'm the parent, and so I'm always right, and you do whatever I say regardless. So adult children grow up, they come up to adults with that type of dynamic. So to sit down and try to have a conversation, I mean, again, both people have to have the humility to say, you know what, something's not working. So can we sit down and have a talk? But then in sitting down and having the conversation, are both going to be accountable, right? Because
Oh boy.
I
Yeah.
can, yeah, I can think about, and this is not to shift blame, but again, your parents can only take you to a certain level, right? And parents are amazing. Thank God for parents. Even the word of God says not to anger your child, right?
Right.
So in this conversation, how do we make it productive, right? And sometimes, I believe that there needs to be another person because neither or maybe one or the other are equipped to do that. But then somebody either lashes out, starts to pass judgment, well, you should have did this. Well, I told you not to marry him, or you should have never went to that school, that sort of thing. So it's like, we didn't come together for you to unravel all the things that I did or that I'm doing wrong. We're coming together so that we can establish a boundary. so that we can figure out where both of us are and we can respect one another. Because I also think what we do is we parents use to their advantage, again, speaking from my own culture, the scripture, honor thy mother and father, so that you'll live long, right? And so I definitely believe that. And I do think there is a level of honor that comes with, regardless of what age you are, to your parents. At the same time, if your parents are dysfunctional, if they are the person that has traumatized you, or you have been at the hands of trauma from them, doesn't mean that you don't forgive, that you don't love. But that honor takes a whole different turn, because with honor comes boundaries.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think we leave that out, right? So if you're not responsible for what triggers me, I'm responsible for that. I'm responsible for how I respond, but I need you as a parent to understand, this isn't a good this I'm not ready. I don't want to engage in this interaction or this type of conversation with you, so I'm going to remove myself and be okay with it, or vice versa. If the parent is like, you know what, I'm not trying to talk to you. We as adult children need to be okay with, okay, they're not trying to have this conversation, not forcing it on each other.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things that you said. I really wish I had written some of them down to make a few comments. One, I want to go back to honor. I do believe where the Bible tells us about honoring our parents and your days will be long upon this earth. I believe that honor also comes with a case of having a type of communication where if we have open dialogue and show respect without maybe being harsh with one another, without being cruel to one another, without, for example, I'm not going to cuss my parent out, that type of thing. That's a part of that honor. But at the very same time, I recognize that because we tell each other we want to have these communications and we want to develop the skills, there might be a place of push and shove where it's like we're storming in order to get to the norming. And often I've wondered why that has to be the case, especially when you are trying, as these parents might say, or I may say, or you could possibly say, we're trying to do that honoring part with not being nasty, ugly, have a predisposition about what I really want to say to you, but yet you've given me an open forum to do it, and now you're wanting to take it back. And that's the place of the character again as well in that child, or in even that adult child, as we are all growing. Hopefully we're picking up some things along the way. And it's not really about treating them as you want to be treated any longer, because sometimes that goes out the window. I have watched it even in my own dynamics where I don't stop being the parent just because you're an adult. I don't stop wanting you to at least address me without a screaming match, or, for example, I don't want those types of dynamics. And when you ask me something that might seem like it's putting me in a vulnerable spot, I'm really okay to answer it, but I don't want to be in the emotional state of feeling like it's a whipping. And whatever I respond to, you're going to try to dismantle it. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think it works both ways, So I want to go back to, what you were talking about, the honor and being the parent. And so again, I'll say, the topic, as we talked about last week, the things that you didn't learn at home. Where has your child, adult or minor, learned those skills?
Those behaviors. You're correct.
Teaching them. So if you as the parent haven't taught them, what is the expectation now that they're an adult child? Where would they have learned that from if they didn't get it from you? Right. And so then if we don't get it from our parents, that means they don't know how to communicate. That's not all parents, right? because I think there are several, I'm sure, many that do a very, do a very good job. I could talk about my own dynamic. Like, for instance, my dad, I think, is a very good communicator.
Okay.
It's very rare that I see him, lose his cool. I think maybe once or twice I have heard him raise his voice, or, I don't think I've ever seen him lash out
Sure.
on anyone, right? But he's also a dad, and he also, is a wise man, and he also doesn't know everything, right? So when you think about, again, I'll use my own family dynamic. There's a generation gap, and so things are very different, and so there is that honor. I think there's also a level of respect. And here's what I think is missing: two things. So back to what I said about the things we don't learn. We aren't taught communication and social skills most of the time in our homes, right? We talked about that last week, because
Yes.
you're not even taught how to show up. And, it's, again, that age old, what happens in our house stays in our house. So you carry that with you. So we live a life, especially in our community, in the Black culture, we live a life of secrecy. Everything is, we're not told it's secret, we're told it's private. Even at your detriment, you keep it private. Then the other part to that is, do parents really have that skill? And then the last part of that I'll say is the level of respect, because here's what I think adult parents sometimes forget is that now I'm an adult. And I'll give the most elementary answer. So when you ride in my car,
Okay.
we travel the way that I travel. Doesn't mean that I'm not accommodating. Doesn't mean that I am not serving you as my mom or my dad, right? Because
Okay.
I'm definitely that kid. I like to pick my parents up and take them out, pick up the tab, But please don't go on and on about why my car thing is dusty, or you're at quarter tank. I mean, like, that is
Yes.
that is mothering. That is,
Actually, you know what, Angel? I'm sorry to cut across you. That can become irritating.
it's very right.
Yes.
But back to what you're saying about the honor. But if you flash on them, now you're being disrespectful. You're like, who do you think you are? I'm your mom. I brought you in this world. I'll take you out, right? Okay. So the other thing is, like, you come to my home. This is my house, and I have the order that happens in my house. So there's a level of respect, and it works both ways. So when I go to your house, this is the norm. This is the protocol at your house, and so I follow the protocol. Like at my mom's house, we do not we don't put glasses like on the table without a coaster. We don't leave trash on the table. Like, we pick up our stuff and take it to the sink or whatever. We don't, after dinner, we're done. We get up. Now at my house, I'm like, chill. Let's talk, let's marinate. And I, as the host, will then walk around, and as I'm talking, and take things away. Like, I don't want to take away from that part. And it doesn't mean that one way is right or wrong or better than the other. It's just, here's the protocol in this container, and here's the protocol there. So I say all of that to say is there has to be a level of respect. And I believe what parents sometimes think, again, because I come from a generation where you didn't have no rights. You didn't close your door. Whatever I cooked is what you ate. And if you didn't eat, you had cereal or peanut butter and jelly, or you didn't eat at all. Like, that's how it goes, right? Mm-hmm. So as an adult, I believe the opportunity for a lot of parents parenting their adult children is, now I need you to respect that. Number one, I need you to trust that what you gave me was enough. And I need you to respect that now I'm an adult and I'm driving my own vehicle to my destiny. And everything doesn't require your input. And we don't necessarily have to talk about everything.
I agree. Again, as I said earlier, I don't want to cut across you because all of this is good. And the one word that keeps popping out that I keep hearing again and again is boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Because right, wrong, or indifferent, as you were being raised, and as you said, there was no handbook, and we still came as parents with some of our own baggage, the baggage of how we were raised, some of the things which I think I mentioned last time, as crazy as it might sound, don't put
Mm-hmm.
that on the bed, or don't sweep underneath my feet. I want to get married again. All these myths, all these different types of stories that we have, or don't sweep the dirt out the door at nighttime. Like, what's going to happen? Is the
Mm-hmm.
dust monster going to come and eat the
Right.
dust balls or something? But
Right.
nevertheless, in any of those boundaries, whether it was a myth or not, those
Mm-hmm.
were some traits that I know I've taken on, and I had to let them go because there
Mm-hmm.
was nothing in that in particular that was going to be a permissible thing that I would do to bring about more increase in growth or increase in understanding. All right. So I'll put it right there. Now, when it comes to the boundaries with the child who is still underage, even if a child is an adult who is living in the home, I believe that respect and boundaries are kind of like twin towers. They go hand in hand. You
Mm-hmm.
want respect to, maybe if you're living in the bottom part of the house, to stay there and live there and call it your quarters. However, if I do come downstairs to knock on your door to see how you're doing, since we are sharing this whole house, is
Mm-hmm.
it still okay for you to trash your room, or, just to live like you have never had home training? We always say that, but it's not even about the home training. It's back to, you have a space, and how are you going to regard that space? And
Mm-hmm.
please don't think that I'm the police patrol who enjoyed coming into your space and
Mm-hmm.
saying something about how you are living. I would never open my mouth if you would keep that space clean to a degree. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's my hope anyway. And now, when we talk about boundaries and that respect as twin towers again, just because you are an adult child living in or out of the house, I'm not coming to your home to do those very same things. I am one of those mothers who would come and say, can I help you with the dishes? Is there anything I can help you to do? Just offering it up. But if you tell me, take a seat, relax, I've got it, I will respect that boundary.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I can respect, an adult parent, if your adult child is living with you, absolutely. Again, I think that goes back to whatever the norms or the protocols, what are the rules of engagement for this household while we share,
Yeah.
what are we together on, right? So, I mean, if you're not a person that makes your bed every day, so be it, right? But what we're, I would, again, this is my level of courtesy. I'm obviously not going to have food piled up under my bed and trash in there. But I will tell you, I lived with my parents for a short time as an adult, and I am not, I do not housekeep the same way that
Right.
that any of my family does, as a matter of fact. So I I'm not a person who always makes up my bed every day. Here, as of late in this year, it's one of the things that I commit to do, because I kind of have I try to plan out my days, and so it's one of the things that I have started to do again.
Okay.
But I'll tell you, we always did it growing up. So I remember the first thing I wanted to do when I was grown was, if I don't want to make up my bed, I ain't making up my bed. So, but that's just me. I'm not sure that everybody else had that regard. But I'm a very, um, I don't know, I live in my house. And so it's okay if people come over and they see that my house is lived in. I
Mhm.
definitely like for it to be tidy. I mean, anybody that's been to my home knows you know, I'm not gonna say I'm a Martha Stewart, but I definitely am home worthy. I could be on a video on YouTube anyways.
Sure.
I think as the adult child, you're living in their house. So you have to honor and respect what the protocol is. So if there's a community bathroom, you need to make sure the bathroom is clean. You need to, but see, these are things I would say for me. Now that's something that my parents taught me. So when I would go and stay with other relatives, I've gone and stayed with aunties and different people. And before I left, I remember I went to visit my auntie Pat in California, and I stayed for about 8 days. And so when I left, well, first while I was there, she did most of the cooking because she's a bomb cook, but I helped wash dishes, put things away, the food away. But when I left, I stripped the bed, I washed the linen, I put it fresh on the bed, I vacuumed, I dusted the room, I cleaned the bathroom where I was, emptied out the trash, made sure I washed the towels and put everything back up, because that's just that's what you do.
You learned from your upbringing.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and everyone doesn't get that same upbringing.
Mhm.
And some do
Trust
try.
me, I know.
Yes. Go right ahead.
Because I done had a few grown folks stay at my house, and it's like, but I will say there's a part of me too, and this is something that I think I've taken from my mom, is that they're your guests, so you kind of want to dote over them a little bit, and you want them to relax. So you don't necessarily have that expectation, but I tell you what, don't let my mama find out I went to somebody's house and didn't do it. You know what I'm saying? Because I've had people at my house and I'm like, oh, don't worry about it. I'll do it. I'll take care of it. But if they took the initiative, then fantastic, And
I think that's another key word too. I mean, we're finding the keys to our questions or our concerns in what we're saying. So finish that one off. That's another key word, initiative.
Yeah, I mean, so we were talking about, the communication, right? So I was saying that, where do we get those skills from? How do we learn that? I mean, it wasn't until my adult life that my father likes to call it, when I got my first real job, that I started learning like emotional intelligence. I started reading more content about, being the best person that I could be, along with scripture, obviously, right? Because that's one of the greatest books on character and how to live.
Right.
But authors like John Maxwell, Dr. Henry Cloud, and those sort of things. And part of that, this is probably a buzzword or maybe a catalyst term. I went to therapy as an
Yes.
adult, and so part of my assignments in therapy were to read certain books and have a conversation about what I took away and how I was going to apply that to my life. So here's the other part, I think. So let me back up. So that part, I think, is initiative, because you're making a decision to say, I mean, not necessarily that something is wrong with me, but I think I can be better. And I think there's an opportunity for me to communicate better with my family and my parents. So what does that look like for me? So it's initiative, and it's also accountability, not expecting the other person, well, you need to go to therapy, or you need to go to a class, or you need to get delivered, or whatever. While that may be true, what are you doing, about your own stuff, right? So when you take on that thing of, what, let me just work on me and deal with it. Because a lot of times when you just deal with your own stuff, then you learn how to respond appropriately, emotionally, intelligently when you're triggered, or when your mom comes in your house and starts cleaning and you want to flip a table and you're just like, Mom, that looks really great. You know what? I think I can take it from here. Why don't you have a seat?
Yeah. And initiative, let's go a little deeper with that one too, because the initiative, hopefully, for all of us, whether child or a grown person, is learning those life skills again, learning life lessons, tuning in to seeing how we in our development can grow, whether it's spiritually, whether it's in the natural, even if it's physically, verbally, in our communication. But the growth pattern must be something that, first of all, I get it, from nurture to nature. It has to be instilled. It's not like a child comes out of the womb understanding that they're going to grow up immediately, okay? And
Mhm.
that there's going to be some life lessons or tools that they'll need in order to have that stability. More past just survivor skills, but having knowledge and some wisdom, having
Mhm.
some understanding. And I'm back to that word empathy again, compassion toward people, knowing that it doesn't matter if you're an only or if you've got siblings, that there are
Mhm.
more people in the room than just you. And everybody will get a turn to have the attention that they need. And that
Mhm.
really takes us into adulthood, adulting, and talking about healing and some of the places that still maybe need to be shored up, some of the places that still need to have the ability to get over, pass,
Mhm.
understand, come to a place where you have made a consideration that you're not going to carry unforgiveness for the rest of your life. If nothing else, it's for you to be able to get past whatever those previous hurts were, whatever
Mhm.
your desires were that you didn't have met when you were coming up, and now here you're an adult and you're still upset that they were not met. Were they desires or whether it was needs? Because there is a responsibility for you to also take charge over yourself. And that goes back to now. Let's introduce to our audience today a little snippet from the video that was being shown about healing hurts between parents and children in a family, because there's too many children who are adults now that have began to see this as the norm, and there's too many parents who have let the children go and haven't spoken with them in months, years, and who knows how long, and they're dealing with maybe their own personal guilt or wanting to reconcile or whatever it might be. And I
Mhm.
believe this video will be a helping tool for our audience on today. We won't watch very long. We do not own the rights to this video, but we wanted to show just a little snippet that nowadays, whether it's in mental health or medical health, we have to talk about these issues so we can all begin to recover. Let me just put it up for us to be able to see. One moment. I'm going to open this so we can really see it, make it wider. Here we go. This video is about Dr. John Townsend, healing parent and adult child relationships. We do not own the rights to this.
Is it playing? Z? I can't see anything. If it's playing, I can't see it or hear it. I can see your screen, but I can't see the focus of the family video.
I have to apologize that you were not able to hear this video. I remembered that we had an X over here at one time, and then it's like that X is no longer there. So, in a nutshell, that video was basically talking about the person who was the guest today has two adult children, and he's written several books about how to adult with those children in regards to healing that type of parent and child relationship. And quite frankly, a lot of the things that we've already spoken about, he's actually sharing that as one of the many topics on why we're still not able to have these types of conversations or commentary, exchanges without someone walking away feeling resentful, lost,
Mhm.
as if maybe they weren't heard or whatever the case may be. And now they're out there having relationships with someone. Maybe they're married, perhaps they're beginning to plan for having children. And it's
Mhm.
unfortunate that some of the same things that we were just discussing will still be a part of their household, the influences of their childhood that were not mended will go into their next relationship, or that maladaptive place again, where because it was such a broken home, they have not received the tools to be able to live with someone in harmony. They're still living even as partners as a single person, or whatever the case may be, or
Mhm.
they're living with the partner and they're not mindful of being more positive and bonding in their relationships.
Yeah, I was thinking about as we were talking earlier, and if you want, I actually have the video pulled up. If you want me to try to share it here in just a moment, I can.
You can.
Um, I was just going to mention that, you know, how how then do people? So the greater another issue here, the foundational opportunity or challenges when people don't know that they're dealing with what is unhealthy or dysfunctional or don't know how to establish boundaries, right? So you can't address a thing that you can't confront a thing that you don't know what it is. So I think there are that demographic of people who are operating just based on what they know, age old term, more things are caught than taught. So they're modeling what they've already seen. And so they don't know that this is not, I don't want to use the term normal, but this is not the
Healthy.
best way, right? It's not the best way. It's not the healthiest way. And so until a child, even as an adult, and that's usually what happens to children who grow up where their healthy boundaries haven't been established or taught, the opportunity to communicate and have open communication without judgment, having that space to share, what you're feeling, those types of things. What usually happens is until they are exposed to a different way, they don't even know that the way they've been doing things is not okay. Or
Yeah.
until you get in a relationship or at a job where somebody's like, we don't talk to people like that. Like we don't raise voice, we don't cuss at people, we don't slam doors here, or those types of things, or we don't ghost, we don't just stop communication, or those types of things. So
Isolate.
so
Yeah.
it isn't until you get into a space, right? And I can think of times where I have gone as a child and as an adult. Again, I'll use a very elementary example. I grew up in a household where you were told you eat everything on your plate. Whatever is put in front of you, you eat it. Now, some people might get a little perturbed about what I'm about to say, but that may be an issue why we have obesity in our community, right? Because we eat everything and everything is supersized, and we celebrate everything over food. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but when
Mhm.
I would go to other places, I'm gonna give this example. So when you start to learn to the etiquette, the social etiquette of eating, right? Well, when I became an adult and I would go out, I didn't know that you're supposed to eat the salad first, and then the meal comes.
Wait a minute. Who says?
Hold on. Well, hold on. But socially, that's typically when you go to a restaurant, nowadays they ask you, would you like for us to bring the salad out with your meal? But usually when you order a meal that comes with the salad comes first. You eat the salad,
Right.
you get your palate ready. And there's a reason why, from the health perspective, that you have the roughage first, and then you have your entree, and then if you want to, you have dessert. Well, I would just have it all at the same time. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. That's why I say I want to use the most elementary example. But because as a child, we didn't go out to eat very often.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't understand the dynamic of when you sit down at the table. Like, I don't remember my parents teaching me to put a napkin on my lap. I don't remember them.
Okay. Yes.
I want to use something very basic, right? So I'm saying all that to say, if you don't know that there's a different way, the way that you've been doing it is the way you're going to continue to do it as an adult. I think I shared with you before, I was listening to this program about generational behaviors, and in so many different ways. You can talk about generational iniquity, whatever you want to put on it. In some communities they refer to them as generational curses, and there's such a thing, right? We know there's also generational blessings. But I was listening to this program, and the lady on the show was saying that they always cut the legs off the turkey.
Oh, yes. I love this one. Okay.
And so as they were talking about, because it was a show around Thanksgiving, they're talking about their traditions, and the guy's like, well, why do y'all take the legs off the turkey? And so her sisters did it, her mama did it, her grandma did it, her grandma did it, all the aunties and the cousins, everybody did it that way. And so she said when she finally went back and asked her mom, why do we do this? You know why they did that? Was because they, at that time, her grandmother and great grandmother did not have a pot that was large enough to fit the whole turkey. So they cut the legs off. Now, I'm not trying to say I'm the genius here, but I wonder if that's how we started smoking turkey legs alone and eating them as an entree. I mean, turkey legs is a whole industry. Okay.
Yes, it is.
Or
Or
so
the
that in her community, they weren't the only family that was doing that. But she didn't even know why she was doing it. But she just kept doing it. So now, go with me here. Now I'm an adult, or she's an adult. I can afford any size roasting pan I want. I'm still cutting off the turkey legs and putting them aside.
But Angel, I have to laugh because you're using the turkey. And in my community, I heard that in regards to a ham. The ham, like the little rough bottom part of it, it looks like it should be the part of the shoulder into the joint. That was being cut off because we just did it. And then later we find out that it was being done because the roaster pan was not large enough to hold it.
Okay, so I don't want to go deep, but I'm about to say something that might go over it. I'm just going to say
if it goes over my head, I'll ask you for a tutorial.
But when I think about that, back to everything we're talking about here, parenting adult children, life lessons that we didn't learn, more things are caught than taught. We take on whatever we've been exposed to.
Yes.
Till we come into an environment where we see something different. Back to the Angel, have the side salad. Breathe, girl. Now eat your entree. You don't have to eat it all. You can take it home. Breathe, girl. Oh, you want dessert? You don't have to eat it here. You can take it home. Same thing. Now, Lisa, Keisha, Angel, Zanetta, you are in a different space in your life. You can afford a bigger roasting pan. If you don't know why we cook turkey, you're gonna have the biggest pan. And you know what we'll probably do? Is we'll put 2 turkeys in there and cut the legs off. Because we haven't been anywhere, or we may go to so-and-so's house, our friend or whoever, and we're like, oh, y'all keep the turkey legs on? And everybody's like, Girl, yeah, we get the turkey legs on because we haven't taken the time, number one, to create our own norm now, our own tradition.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean that all of those things are dysfunctional. It doesn't mean that cutting the legs off are not okay. But think about those patterns or the behaviors that weren't okay, that
Yeah.
weren't healthy. So
Mhm.
until you go into an environment and you're like, oh, they're actually fighting, they're arguing, but everybody's calm, everybody's, saying their piece. They got a safe word, or somebody in the family knows when to say, okay, you know what, that's enough for today. So this is what we're going to do. Somebody takes charge and people walk away and nobody's mad. And you're like,
Yes.
can I,
Right.
can I give y'all my social security number? Did y'all want to, did y'all want to put me in y'all's family? I mean, no, seriously, because
And that's
until you get exposed to something different,
Mhm.
you don't know because you only know here's the
What
phrase
you
we use.
know.
You don't know what you don't know until you don't know it, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes, that makes a lot of sense. Amen. And Angel, on that note, it also makes a lot of sense too that even if we were going to fuss and fight, what is it we used to say? Our old saying, we fuss and fight like Ike or whatever. Well, yeah, Ike and Tina, but we really aren't fussing and fighting like Ike and Tina to the point of blows, to the
Mhm,
point of, this is really going to impact this relationship where we can't keep civil and go
mhm,
on with both our lives and still be cordial to one another. But what I do see is we have the ability to be able to have arguments and still be kind and still be able to speak the next day and
mhm,
still walk away, whether it's my win or my loss, which hopefully we're not thinking like that in the first place, but
mhm,
maybe I did receive some information that was difficult for me to swallow at the time. But when I
mhm.
take a second look or I think a little more about it, it makes sense. And I don't need to react because I just want to be the loudest voice in the room, or my reaction does not come because I have made it up in my mind before anything else is spoken that I'm just going to be upset or mad at you. And
Well,
that's the place about being able to resolve, reconcile, whether it's between siblings, parents, or whomever it might be between.
mhm. Well, and there's the need to be right. So are you communicating because you want to be right? Or are you communicating to get to resolution?
And that's a great question because we can chat about anything, can't we not? Or can
Mhm,
we? And the questionable place is in your emotional intellect, your wisdom, the voice that you have within that wants to be heard. Is the issue residing in the challenge of you don't believe you're being heard? Or is it residing in the challenge of not just wanting to be right, but having that last word?
Well, I think having the last word and being right, from my perspective, are the same thing, right?
Okay.
And I think, I don't think, I believe that peace a lot of times is better than being right. So you have to choose your battles, right? You have to choose, again, you're responsible for your response.
Yeah.
And you cannot be in communication or community with people and not be angry with them. You can just make a decision that right now I'm not in a place to converse or talk about this particular subject, right? um, I think that most of the time we want to be right versus looking for resolution. We want to be right. We also want to be heard. But being heard doesn't necessarily mean that you're right. But here's the thing about being heard, and I can, this bringing it full circle back to parenting adult children is whatever the dynamic was when you were coming up is typically how it remains as an adult, right? And so if you were a child that felt like you weren't heard, let me just digress here just for a moment. that shows up in so many ways in your life, when you felt like you haven't been heard. And so it sometimes even transposes into the lack of care. So as a person who felt like they were not heard, then you can sometimes automatically equate that to they don't care because they haven't heard me, right? And so now it started out as I just didn't feel heard. Now I feel like because I'm not heard, you don't care. And now because I feel like you don't care, then that imposes a hyper sense of independence. Now you have a trust wound, a trust issue. And then because you don't trust anybody, because you're creating your own walls and you're putting your own fences up, so you're not letting good or bad in. Now you're dealing with rejection. So now
Yes.
you compounded a whole lot of things on, a little person who felt like they aren't being heard. But if you had to tell a young person, even an adult child, if you had to tell a 7-year-old, I mean, there should be a survey. Ask kids, did you feel heard at home?
Or even ask adults.
Well,
Now.
but I'm saying it starts there. So
Oh,
if I didn't hear heard if I didn't feel like I was heard as an adult, after so much time, then I'm gonna feel like no one's gonna hear me anyway. So I'm just gonna do what I'm gonna do. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I get it. You're not being heard as an adult, but you probably feel not heard as an adult because you weren't heard as a child. I mean, it doesn't. It people don't start out being heard and then not being heard. It's usually the other way around. You are not being heard, and you have to evolve into being heard. And as an adult, now you own the responsibility of figuring out how to communicate in such a way that you can walk away feeling like you were heard. And you have to be okay with, well, if I wasn't heard, you know what? This is what it is, and I'm gonna have to go in peace and may the peace of God be with me, right?
Yeah.
But as a kid, as a child, who advocates for you to be heard? Because
that's a great point right there.
Mhm.
As a child, who's doing the advocating for you to be heard?
Right. And again, if you don't feel heard, again, and this is not every family dynamic, and it isn't a discredit to how I grew up. I mean, we had our own dysfunction. Obviously, everybody does, but I think my childhood was pretty okay. It wasn't horrible. I'm here, right?
Adulting.
But who was gonna check in and be like, well, Angel, do you feel heard? Do you feel like your needs are being met? Do you feel like you're okay? Well, because the dynamic in my household was, you don't have any rights. You're the child, you're not the what was that show that used to come on? I can't remember. And the character would say, not the mama. You're not the mama.
I can't remember either right now. But
So,
it's not the Cosby Show like we used to watch when we were growing up. And it's
mhm,
not Fred Sanford and his son. All of those shows were showing various different dynamics of how the children were being taught, how they were being heard or not
mhm,
heard, or even how the parent was persuading them,
right,
to a certain
correct.
degree. Yeah.
Correct. Like, so you said something a little earlier about Ike and Tina. There's a song by Alicia Keys called Unbreakable, and she says that, we could fight like Ike and Tina, or get back like Bill and Camille. Do
Yes.
like Oprah and Stedman, or
Right.
instead struggle like James in Florida, Evans, right? So
Yes.
the meaning of the what I believe the message behind the song is, we can go from one extreme to the other, and the hook is, we might have to take a break, but y'all know we'll be back next week. This love is unbreakable, right?
Yeah.
So you can swing from the pendulum so many different ways, but at the end of the day, and I could say how we say it in our family is, we do fight, we do have, we don't always agree, we don't see the eye, but come for one of us.
Exactly.
All of us coming for you, right?
Yeah.
That's how it is.
And that's how it's going to stay, because it's not like we're trying to say anything outside of the perimeter is not okay. You're
Mhm.
still okay as long as you understand the boundaries inside the perimeter.
Right.
Yeah. Well, before we go, do you want to try showing that video? Since you were unable to hear it, maybe you can open it one more time, and that will help be the stopping point of our conversation today. As you show it, we'll come back and we'll say, see you next time to our audience.
Sure. Let's see. Let's see. And let me bring, oops, sorry. Give me just a moment.
Okay. But we've had some great conversations today, covered a lot and crossed a few fields in order to really understand how a lot of these relationships have developed at home under the things that I didn't learn. And I still need life lessons.
About 9 months ago, she sent me an email stating that she was going to be cutting me out of her life, which she did. I've reached out to my children on various occasions, including the death of their grandmother, and there's been no response.
I've not spoken to my dad in 2 years and haven't seen my mom since last year.
Do you have any suggestions on what I can do to repair our relationships?
Welcome to the Focus on the Family broadcast, helping families thrive. John, every family has to deal with differences and difficulties because we're fallen people. I mean, we don't live perfectly, and therefore we create chaos in some way. Some create more chaos than others. But one of the top calls we receive here in our counseling team comes from parents of adult children. It's a growing category for us where these relationships are broken for one reason or another. But you can apply it to every relationship that you have in marriage, in relationships with your adult children, probably your teenagers too. The point is, we hear often about feelings of resentment, sadness, anger, grief between the parents and their children. And it's heartbreaking because it makes life feel so much heavier. And today we're going to focus on giving attention specifically to those areas of relationship. And I think, again, these principles are going to apply in every direction. Let me say this: God has created the family as the key social unit. This is an institution not created by government or by man. It's created by God. And that's why we at Focus on the Family defend it vigorously, because we believe this is the beginning. This is where you learn as a child those moral values, those principles about God, and then how to treat others. And we have a wonderful guest today who's going to help us do that even better.
Yeah, Dr. Townsend is a nationally known leadership consultant, psychologist, and best-selling author, and he's the founder of the Townsend Institute for Leadership and Counseling. He and his wife have two adult children, and he's written a number of books, including the one we'll talk about today, called Boundaries. It's a best-selling book that he co-wrote with Dr. Henry Cloud.
John, welcome back to Focus.
Thanks, guys.
Now, on this, the Boundary Bundle, if I can call it that, all the boundary materials, you've hit 9 million units sold. That's incredible, 9 million.
Yeah, it's been a blessing. The funny thing is, Henry and I always thought when we wrote that stuff at the beginning 25 years ago that, okay, people will learn about boundaries. They all have good boundaries and we'll move on. But it's work to do it. And so they're selling more than they were then. And now the 25-year-olds are getting the book because their parents raised them with boundaries and they're trying to teach their kids the same thing.
Yeah. Let's move to the estrangement issue and what we set the program up to talk about. This conflict between parents and their adult children. I mentioned that Focus, we're getting a lot more response with people that are experiencing that. Are you hearing the same? And why do you think the intensity of that relationship breakage between parent and the 20-something child is happening?
Yeah, I am hearing and seeing a lot of it, Jim, and I think there's a reason for it. Is that, God created us to be people who were full of grace and truth, like He is, like it talks about in Ephesians, and that means to be able to connect, but also to be able to talk directly when you need someone without freaking everybody out. We're supposed to be loving people, but truthing people. But there's been some family breakdown over the last 30 years where a lot of times the parents don't feel like they should do that. That might be a mean thing. I want to keep the self-esteem good and all that. And so they've sort of like shied away from hard truths with their children. Now we've got a culture that's kind of the same way, that if you say something that you disagree with, you're out of my life. So the 25-year-olds they had a background maybe where there wasn't a lot of truth and love. We call it integration in the clinical world. Truth and love weren't integrated. So maybe their background wasn't very much that way. And also the culture is saying, yeah, write anybody off that you disagree with instead of let's have a talk about it. That skill is no longer present like it used to be.
Yeah, which is so sad.
There it is right there.
It's taken care of, right?
Absolutely. It's the only way.
Dealt with. You speak to that issue. You do a lot of counseling with people. Describe that person and the why, how you could have this disconnect, this estrangement between you and your adult child. And it's kind of like that saying, when you keep hitting your head up against the same problem and you deal with it in the same way and you get the same result, which isn't where you want to be.
Definition of insanity.
Right. Why do we do that as God's creatures? I mean, why aren't we learning from those mistakes?
Jim, I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One of them is a thing that we call in the clinical world defensive hope. And defensive hope says, if it's first you don't succeed, try again. In other words, right, there are some times where doing the same thing several times, beating a nail into the wall can help. And so we do that. But then we take it to an extreme thinking, well, it's just not loud enough. I'll tell them 1,000,000 times. And then the adult child just alienates more. The other is because I think that they feel a bit helpless. Like, I've got no other skill here. And I feel like I'm going to, even if it threatens to alienate you, I want you back so bad. I'll even do the wrong thing because that's better than doing nothing. Because the helplessness of an adult parent is so sad because this is the person I love the most.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, when you care about that person so much and you see,
you can't reach them. It's so hard to be a parent and you can't reach them anymore.
Well, and maybe that's a good question. Describe what has been the precedent there that has allowed this relationship to become so sour. And you get to that point where nothing's working now. You have heard all of it, I would think. So what happened 10 years before that, and 8 years before that, and 5 years before that?
Yeah, and it's always a combination in varying ratios between what I did as a parent and what my adult child did, right, 10 years ago. What's their part and what's my part? It's never 100%, very, very rarely. It's 100% anything. So a lot of times on the parent's part is either when it was time to discipline little Sammy, I didn't do it at all because I didn't want to make him feel bad. And then that means hard talks later, they don't have the ability. Or I came on too hard with Sammy and I disciplined, the punishment didn't fit the crime. And I was way, way too strict with him and he's alienated. So that's kind of me on the parent part. And on Sammy's part, it's like, okay, I didn't get perfect parenting, but I don't want to forgive, and it's a lot easier to blow them off. And here I am also developmentally in the launching stages. The Bible says in Genesis 2 about leaving and cleaving. Here I'm in the leaving and cleaving stages. My mom and dad aren't the center of my life anymore. Right.
I'm laughing because I'm living it.
Right. And so they're kind of like oatmeal to me. It's just not interesting anymore. I've got all these friends and things I want to do and I want to travel. So I've got that pressure in my head. Plus, we're kind of like at odds to some issue. It's way too much brain damage for me to try to go in and have the hard talks. I'll just live my life. So they've got that launching energy saying, it's just too much trouble.
No, it's so true. And one thing too, and I think this would be
I think we definitely can end it right there because that said a lot in such a short period of time. Mm-hmm. Angel, any final words for this episode for today?
No, just a reminder to people to, pretty much what Dr. Townsend said. Again, we don't own the rights to the broadcast of that video, but you can find it on YouTube on Focus on the Family. There's a whole series. And also, if you noticed in the background, they showed the book Boundaries. That is one of the very first books I read in my late 20s, early 30s, going to therapy. That was one of the very first books that I read, and it opened my eyes for a number of things, and I have read it multiple times. And you can find that content now: boundaries for marriage, boundaries with at school, boundaries at work, boundaries in dating. So, and for the community of faith, you should know that Dr. Cloud and Dr. Townsend are both believers, and they have this uncanny knack to go into the earth and share these principles from a clinical and biblical perspective without in every arena, right? So they don't just go and talk to churches; they talk to companies, they talk to CEOs, they talk to Fortune 500 people. So I would encourage you to, I would encourage the group, back to what I was saying originally about what Dr. Townsend is saying, the love and grace component, but also to educate yourself. Think about where you are in your dynamic for yourself. Are you a person that, as an adult now, you didn't feel heard? What does that look like? What is your responsibility in the life lessons that you didn't learn? So we don't get the luxury of just saying, well, nobody taught me that. Well, now you have that opportunity to go learn, go chase after that, learn, take initiative, have your own accountability, and learn and grow.
I thank you for those last comments, because that really is what we're all about. We're not just doing the topic in order to say that we have a platform. We're talking about this topic because it's a real life experience that we have previously lived out and are still living out today. And looking at how we can tailor some of our own behaviors, some of our own thoughts and processes in order to be able to share with you that as people, God's people, infallible people, people that run into problems and challenges, people that have not had some of the best childhoods, people, that's who we are. And we're wanting to open up to talk to you in order for you to learn these life lessons. Thank you. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining. See you all.